大家好，欢迎来到本期节目。今天一上来，先带大家看一出美国五角大楼自导自演的地缘政治大戏。就在最近，美国国防部更新了他们那份所谓的中国军事公司黑名单，也就是1268名单。这一次，他们直接对中国企业界的几大巨头痛下杀手，阿里巴巴、百度、比亚迪全部榜上有名，而腾讯也早在2025年就被套上了这个紧箍咒。五角大楼的理由挺义正言辞的，说这些中国最大的 AI 和电动汽车冠军企业在搞军民融合，在支持中国军队，威胁到了美国的国家安全。哦，我的天哪，你能想象吗？一家中国的科技公司竟然在支持中国的军队，这简直是太不可思议了。但讽刺的是什么？前白宫官员自己都出来吐槽了。按照美国国防部这个逻辑，福特和通用汽车天天跟美军合作，那他们是不是也该被列为美国军事公司？更搞笑的是，五角大楼现在指责中国公司在做的事，恰恰是美国自己的科技巨头，比如 OpenAI、Anthropic， 甚至埃隆·马斯克的 Grok 正在或者渴望为美军和中情局 CIA 做的事。这就叫我怀疑你正在做我正在做的事，所以这不可接受，小家伙，我要制裁你。美国现在正用一种零和博弈的狂热思维，试图切断投资者，切断供应链，把中国科技孤立出去。但他们没意识到，这种疯狂的出口管制和繁文缛节，正在把全世界的客户推向中国。节目后半段，我会带大家听一段极其生动的冷笑话。当阿根廷的2个首席技术官 CTO 下班后喝着啤酒，一个选了美国 AI 架构，另一个选了中国 AI 架构，他们的命运会有什么不同？这不仅仅是个段子，用科技博主网络老面孔伊莱的话说，这叫伏笔，这是美国文明衰落的未来。好了，话不多说，接下来让我们一起进入正片，看看五角大楼这次又是怎么把愚蠢的外交政策玩出新花样的。
So coming from Fortune, Pentagon accuses Alibaba, Baidu, and BYD, 3 of China's biggest companies, of supporting the Chinese military. Oh no! Can you believe if some civilian technology companies supported the military? How horrible would that be? Can you imagine if Anthropic was being used to target people for assassinations by the Pentagon? We would never do that type of thing in this country. So anyways, I don't know. This is just another video on how stupid our foreign relations policy is vis-a-vis China for so many things, right? Basically, we gotta keep beating the war drum of China, man, being bad for, being accused of doing the stuff that we actually do. At this point in time, it's not even like we necessarily know they're doing what we do. We're just going to accuse you. We think that maybe, possibly, you might be doing what we are actually doing, and that is unacceptable, little China man. So yeah, this is another thing going through. So we have all these again here. So. We have the export controls, and we have all of this kind of stuff going on. Many, many, many lists. And so the Pentagon has one of these lists for companies that, might be basically supporting, adversarial militaries. And so these companies are going onto that particular list. The concern here is normally when people get put on a list, initially the list is kind of stupid, but it's one of those laddering up things. So, okay, so they're on this Pentagon list. And here's the thing, this Pentagon list probably doesn't matter a whole hell of a lot. The Pentagon is not going to be buying their tanks from BYD, so it probably doesn't matter. But here's the thing. Once they're on that list, then it makes it easier to put them on the next list, which makes it easier to put on the next list, which then, it escalates up to the point that we decide we have the right to try to destroy these companies. Because, they might be doing what our companies are actually doing. The Pentagon accused some of China's biggest companies, including Alibaba, Baidu, and BYD, of supporting the Chinese military, doubling down on an earlier decision to label crown jewels of the country's corporate world as threats to national security. Oh my golly. Can you imagine a Chinese company supporting the military of China? Anyways, I don't know. The Defense Department announced the designations Monday in an update to a roster of companies that it has determined aid the People's Liberation Army. The companies were included in a previous version that was posted briefly in February before being withdrawn minutes later without any explanation, sowing confusion about the Pentagon's intentions. Oh, we all know what the Pentagon's intentions are. The move, the U.S. has now declared the three of China's most prominent AI champions, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent, are aiding the Asian country's armed forces. Tencent was added to the list in 2025 and has been seeking its removal. The designation of BYD, meanwhile, targets China's top electric vehicle company. And again, they're aiding the Asian country's armed forces, as Anthropic is our armed forces, and OpenAI is our armed forces, and Grok, well, let's be clear here. Grok is probably not aiding our armed forces, but they're trying. Elon Musk is like, hey, y'all can use Grok for free. You can, hey, CIA, CIA, you can use Grok to target leaders in other countries for assassination. You can. And then the CIA is like, yeah, but we got Anthropic. Poor Grok. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that if you're the CEO of an AI company and you weren't on some lists? Because you're just kind of that irrelevant. You could use Grok to overthrow another country. I mean, theoretically, but everybody's really gonna be using Anthropic for that. Anyways. Let's see here. The newest version of the Pentagon's so-called 1260H also restored two Chinese memory chip makers, Changxin Memory Technologies and Yangji Memory Technologies, that had previously designated by the Pentagon but were removed from the version that briefly appeared in February. While the list carries few immediate legal repercussions, the Pentagon is increasingly using it to restrict companies' abilities to contract with the U.S. military or to receive research funding. A 1260H designation also serves as a warning to U.S. investors and is widely considered a red flag that can precede more punitive trade restrictions. And so that's the big concern here, right? We have this whole anti-China thing going on, especially with artificial intelligence, right? And there's a big push right now to prevent U.S. investors from investing in Chinese artificial intelligence companies, which is just so. This is where I talk about with our trade practices is just so mind-numbingly insane. So we're worried about the balance of trade between the U.S. and China. And then we prevent China from buying tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of our AI equipment, right? Same thing is true with this whole thing with investment. So if these technology companies are doing well, right? If Chinese AI companies are doing well, wouldn't you want Americans to be able to invest in those companies so that we could get a return on our investment and maybe bring those returns back here to the United States, right? The idea that if, Chinese people can invest in the U.S. stock market, isn't that a good thing for everybody, all the way around? But we see these policies, there's this idea, there's this zero-sum game, especially in the AI world, where the idea, again, they've said it, the idea is that there is one winner in AI. Whoever wins AI, whatever the fuck that actually means, somehow they will control the world. which doesn't make a damn bit of sense, right? But what we see is again and again, more and more of these policies trying to isolate China, essentially regardless for what they do, even when they're doing what we are doing, even when we accuse them of doing what we are actually doing with our own companies. Let's see here. In releasing its updated list, the Pentagon said the named entities qualify as, quote, Chinese military companies operating directly or indirectly in the U.S. based on their alleged activities, quote, providing commercial services, manufacturing, producing, or exporting. Due to China's, quote, military-civil fusion policy, under which Beijing mandates private sector collaboration with the country's armed forces, the Pentagon could theoretically justify designating almost any Chinese company with a U.S. presence. And that's the whole thing, right? Basically, when you start taking a look at this, it just comes down to politics. They can designate anything they want as a problem, simply by definition. John McEntry, a former senior Trump White House official who lobbies for Tencent, criticized the company's continued inclusion on the list. Quote, by expanding the list to Chinese car companies like BYD and NIO, they're revealing how ridiculous the justification is. By their logic, Ford and GM should be classified as American military companies, he said, because again, they work with the U.S. military. And so this is, I don't know, just the continuing idiotic policy that we have towards China. Just to reiterate, the China man is bad. Why is China man bad? Because China man might be doing the things that our companies are actually doing. And we just cannot abide by that. So yeah, it's gonna be curious to see how this goes forward. Yeah, I've been talking a lot about this with the whole schism between the Chinese AI stack and the U.S. AI stack. And now it really is becoming more and more different. I do think is what is interesting with this kind of thing is basically the idea is as we put more and more restrictions on their technology, there will become more of a question going into the future for our trade partners on who our trade partners are actually able to trade with from a practical standpoint. That's one of the issues with with Anthropic, right? So when the Trump administration went after Anthropic, the issue wasn't so much that they were going to get banned from the Pentagon. It was that by being banned from the Pentagon, there are all of these subcontractors and contractors for the Pentagon that also would be prevented from using Anthropic services. So basically the idea is, it's not simply that Pentagon employees or Department of War employees, Department of Defense employees can't use Anthropic, but essentially anybody that they get services from would also not be able to use Anthropic. And that's the real danger, right? So losing $5 billion a year from the Department of Defense, maybe Anthropic can handle that. But essentially, if they get eliminated from the entire economic base that the Department of Defense feeds from, that would be the real damage. And so one of the curious things when you start seeing BYD and Alibaba and that type of deal is as we go into the future and we're dealing with other governments. I talked about this with Argentina or Chile or Spain or Great Britain or whatever. There's going to start to be more and more of that questioning of can we support the United States alongside this technology stack that's essentially been banned by the United States. So they talk about that with Huawei, that one of the reasons that Huawei equipment need to get ripped out of Europe is because since they are NATO countries, they are communicating, especially with the United States. If the Huawei equipment is compromised, then our communications could be compromised too. One of the issues that we're going to run into is simply when economically countries reach a breaking point where basically we tell them, if you want to do business with us, you cannot use the Chinese technology. What happens when they hit the breaking point? We can't afford to deal with the United States anymore. Right? The mandates that the United States is putting onto the rest of the world have become so onerous that they're simply infeasible at this point in time. And you start having more and more people simply go to the Chinese stack. Because again, when you deal with the Chinese stack, you swipe a credit card. right? You deal with the American AI stack, and you got to jump through hoops, and you got to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and you got to kiss a lot of ass, and you better make sure your social media posts all say the right things, right? That's what you have to do if you're dealing with the American AI stack. And if you're dealing with the Chinese AI stack, you swipe your credit card. Can you imagine that, like two CTOs in Argentina, and then like sitting down after a long day of work, and they're having their beers, and they're talking about life, and you have the one Argentinian CTO. It's like, oh my god, man, we're spinning up this data center. Oh, we got all the money to buy all these NVIDIA GPUs and the servers, but then we had to put all this paperwork in, to the U.S. State Department, and then we had to get our entire facility audited. Oh, just another. I think another month. We'll get approved for NVIDIA to actually be able to send the hardware that we've already purchased. Man, it's just deploying artificial intelligence in the 2020. I'm telling you, man, this is just a headache. And then you have the other CTO, and he's sipping his beer and like, really? You went through all that? Yeah, what do you mean? Well, we just went to Huawei and we just swiped our credit card. Yeah, we got all the shit in like 2 weeks. I mean, it was a little frustrating. Like there's one little component that we needed, and that got lost in the mail. So that took 3 weeks before we got it. That kind of pissed me off. Huawei needs to do something about these little widgets, making sure they come with all the rest of the widgets. But yeah, we swiped our credit cards, and 3 weeks later we were building our data center. Wow, that paperwork thing, that sounds pretty shitty. Yeah, I can't imagine dealing with all that crap. Anyways, boys and girls, this is called foreshadowing. Welcome as Eli the computer guy foreshadows the future of the downfall of American civilization. Anyways, so what do you think about this? What do you think about the Pentagon accusing Alibaba, Baidu, BYD, and many other companies, Chinese companies supporting the Chinese military? How do you think this is gonna keep going? I don't know. Put your thoughts down below. If you like these episodes and you want them on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, there's a link in the doobly-doo. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, there's a link down there too. With that, see y'all later.
欢迎回来，我们先来仔细拆解一下五角大楼的这份名单。其实这份名单在今年2月份的时候曾经短暂发布了几分钟，然后就被紧急撤回了，当时没给任何解释，把大家都搞懵了。如今谜底揭晓，美国这次是铁了心要把中国最顶尖的 AI 冠军百度、阿里、腾讯和新能源巨头比亚迪一网打尽，甚至之前被拿掉的2家芯片制造商长江存储和长鑫存储也被重新放了回来。上了这个名单会有什么后果？表面上看，它只是限制这些公司跟美军签合同或拿美国的研究经费。比亚迪和阿里显然不靠卖坦克给五角大楼赚钱，所以直接影响看似不大。但真正的险恶用心在于，这是一块多米诺骨牌。一旦你上了五角大楼的黑名单，美国政府就会更容易把你推进下一个更严厉的惩罚性贸易限制名单。它是在给美国投资者发警告，不准给中国 AI 投资。这难道不是很疯狂吗？美国天天抱怨中美贸易不平衡，然后转头就阻止中国买他们几千亿的 AI 设备。如果中国 AI 公司发展得好，作为一个理性的投资者，难道不应该投资他们，赚取回报再带回美国吗？但美国的决策者不这么想。在他们眼里 AI 是一场赢家通吃的战争，谁赢了 AI 谁就能控制世界。于是为了这个虚无缥缈的控制权，他们开始疯狂地设置障碍。这就是现实，在自由市场里，当经济体达到临界点，美国给全世界施加的合规负担变得如此沉重和不可行的时候，大家就会开始用脚投票。总结一下，五角大楼这一次的动作看似是在大杀四方展现威力，实则是在科技和贸易领域筑起高墙，进行自我孤立。他们把正常的商业和技术发展强行扣上地缘政治的帽子。福特可以和美军合作， OpenAI 可以和五角大楼眉来眼去，但中国的百度、比亚迪和军民融合沾点边儿就是无法接受。 这种双重标准不仅没有打倒中国企业，反而逼着中国企业建立起一套更高效、更不依赖美国的完整生态。当美国 AI 还在忙着审查投资者的政治背景时，中国的科技堆栈已经在凭借着刷卡即用的便利性，悄悄赢下世界上其他那些不想卷入政治纷争的国家了。正如节目里所说，这可能就是美国文明走向相对衰落的科技伏笔。好了，这期节目就到这里。屏幕前的大家怎么看五角大楼指责阿里、百度、比亚迪这件事？你觉得这种极限施压真的能阻止中国 AI 和新能源产业链的崛起吗？还是像视频里预言的那样，美国正在亲手把未来的客户推向中国堆栈？欢迎在评论区留下你的看法，畅所欲言。如果你喜欢本期时政解析，别忘了点赞、关注并转发，感谢大家，我们下期节目再见。